So, good morning, Brasília. Good morning, Berlim. Good afternoon, Berlim. Bom dia para quem está assistindo a gente aqui do Brasil, que está assistindo a gente aqui de Brasília. E uma boa tarde para a Sana Ahmad, que está participando aqui conosco a partir de Berlim. I'd like to introduce Sana Ahmad. Sana Ahmad is a very talented and young researcher. She works as a researcher at the Helmut Schmidt University in Hamburg and is a guest researcher at the Berlin Social Sciences Center. She earned her PhD from the Free University of Berlin in 2023, focusing on content moderation value chains. Previously, she has worked with organizations such as Greenpeace, Amnesty International, and the Child Rights International Network.
But I'm also glad that we could make this work. Yeah, I'm Sana Ahmad, and as was mentioned before, I am a researcher at Helmut Schmidt University, and I have been working on the topic of content moderation for what seems like a very long time now. But since 2017 is what I would say where I really started my exploratory research in this subject, moved to Germany to study this topic and write a dissertation about it. I'm currently in the process of making it into a book that is accessible for not just scholars, but also other professionals such as trade unionists, civil society people, policymakers who are interested in the question of platforms, of AI, of data work, anybody who's interested in these issues, but also freedom of expression and speech, and how it sort of all comes together with the question of platforms. I look forward to your questions, and if there's anything, there's my email address here. Please feel free to write to me, and I'll be happy to stay in touch. So to start with, I think, so what I'm going to focus today is really talk about why platform companies such as Facebook,
Sana,
which is now called Meta,
Sana,
but
sorry
X,
for interrupting you.
which is formerly known as
Sana?
Twitter, but then also Google and other companies, TikTok. Why do they outsource the work of content moderation? What kind of business logics fall behind it, and how do they control it? And I think these findings might be relevant for a sort of a larger audience who's, again, you know, as I spoke before, people who are interested in questions of, you know, the user platforms relations and freedom of speech aspects of it, media and communication scholars in particular. Right, so just to give you an overview of what content moderation is, I mean, you probably all know by now, it's a screening of user-generated content for online websites, and I think one of the first scholarship, well-known scholarship that came out on this was Sarah T. Roberts' work, particularly this paper in 2016, where she writes about digital refuse, you know, in terms of more like the sort of like the dirty work of content moderation. Now it's done for all kinds of online websites, you know, so think about e-commerce platforms, think about all different kinds of applications and platforms, but it holds a special sort of, it holds crucial relevance, so to say, for social media platforms. So on one hand, you have this aspect of maintaining relations with users, right? So there's all kinds of content generated on these platforms, which also includes harmful content, you know, such as hate speech, such as violent content, such as doxing and all sorts of content, fake news, etc., which is genuinely harmful for the users. And of course, harmful content would also mean what is harmful for the business logics of the platforms, right? So there's always this risk of losing these users if there is too much sort of like, you know, harmful content on a platform, users might just leave. So it's also about content moderation is important for maintaining relations with users, and which is also connected to the second aspect of generating advertisement revenues. These platform companies, they generate high amounts of advertisement revenue from the activity of users, right? So which is why it's also, so think about this well-known case of there was, I think, inappropriate content that was streaming on the kids interface, the children interface of YouTube, which led to a lot of sort of big companies leaving from these platforms because they just found it inappropriate, because users were complaining, the parents of the children were complaining. But at the same time, however, many of these advertisement companies also came back. And that is also because, you know, there was a certain dependency also associated with YouTube and these advertisements. But of course, there's a generally a sort of like a concern for platform companies to not lose their advertisers. Apart from these two issues, there's also the issue of increasing platform predictability. You know, social media platforms are not just social media anymore. You know, they're trying to expand their infrastructure. They're trying to expand their infrastructural power. So think about, for example, Facebook, which wanted to be, for example, internet in India, but it has actually sort of successfully tried to sort of, you know, use its free basic services in some parts of the country where it's not just social media but also internet. So they also try to sort of increase the predictability of their platforms to really try to shape the behavior of users and classify and order that content. So that again feeds into their whole sort of like infrastructure expansion processes, and content moderation plays a big role in it. Now, given these aspects, the way content moderation architecture is designed is that it doesn't simply work just in terms of just with automation. Now, when I started research in 2017, as I mentioned before, I remember speaking with people, you know, again, civil society experts mostly, who mostly had two sets of opinions. One was that, isn't it already automated? And the second set of opinion was that, well, I mean, even if it is outsourced, given that there was Sarah Roberts' work out there at that time, people would say, well, I mean, why would companies outsource it outside of India? Sorry, outside of the US, that it would mostly stay within the headquarters of the platform companies because that would risk their credibility, right? So there were mostly these two sets of opinion, and mostly it was automation that often came up, that no, isn't content moderation automated? But it's not. And there's increasing evidence which shows us that it's not yet been automated. So the way content moderation architecture is designed is that, you know, you already have the user activities also involved in this. By user activities here, I mean the reporting and flagging functions of users. You know, now of course we know that you know, there is automated flagging going on. By flagging, I mean again reporting any content that users feel violates the community standards of the platform. So you have automated flagging given the large scale of content, but you still need the flagging activities of the users. The platform still needed because of the unique content, because the content moderation policies are not all exhaustive. So you still need them. At the same time, you know, flagging activities are also not reliable, right? I mean, users are not paid for it, even though we try to, you know, when we study the production processes, outsourcing processes, it's important for us to look at the work of the users, but at the same time, they're not paid for it. There's no economic transaction involved in it. So, you know, they're also unreliable. So for platform companies, right? Which is why, and that becomes more complicated with the large scale of platforms. And just the different contexts of the content being put, which is why this work is then outsourced. Now, I mean, you might have heard that, you know, there is all kinds of going on. There is outsourcing happening to big companies. There's outsourcing happening to, on all these online platforms, the gig work, where there are freelancers doing this work. But in my research, I clearly saw that it was companies such as Facebook, so Meta and all, Google, YouTube, etc. They would outsource to big companies. They would not just outsource it to these online platforms as freelance work and all, because of the confidentiality of this work, because there's user data involved. There's many reasons. I mean, there's a lot of research that shows, why, what platforms try to do and say when they try to sort of hide this whole content moderation outsourcing, whether it's in terms of protecting their tech proprietary, whether it's in terms of just not wanting to be held liable for workers, or whether, it's also creating an illusion of not wanting the users to know that there are workers in another part of the world managing their data. So there's all kinds of reasons involved. So to ensure that sort of, security and sort of like maintain all those sort of processes confidentially, they outsource this work to large companies. Now, most of these companies are located in the global south, in countries such as India and Philippines. India specifically, India was the first location outside of the US where content moderation work was outsourced. And there's many reasons for that. Historically, it's known as since the 1990s as a location where all kinds of low-paid IT work has been outsourced. I'll come to that in a bit, but India is an important location for outsourcing. But also, you have this work being outsourced to the peripheries of the global north. And by that, I mean migrant workers who are doing this work. So I studied a case of a company in Berlin, which was a German company where mostly migrant workers, 90+% migrant workers were doing the content moderation work. The reasons for, and there's also other places in Europe and UK, where there's a large supply of migrant workers, but also people affected by deindustrialization, where there's lack of jobs, etc., who do not have access to decent jobs. The reasons for outsourcing to these particular locations is cost efficiency, of course, but also because these companies want to access local skills, the labor skills, but also the knowledge of the workers, right? In the sense that, in India, for example, there were local skills that were related to, for example, just a lot of soft skills involved in terms of just being very resilient, managing with the content, even though it's psychologically distressing content, the things that they had to see. And that's, again, a culture of sort of IT culture of professionalism that trains workers to be like that, right? I mean, workers don't just come with that sort of like resilience and stuff, but so that those kind of soft skills. But again, you also have other skills, sometimes computer skills, but also language skills. So India is also the biggest consumer market of social media platforms. I think the second largest user base globally of Meta is in India. So of course, you also have the different language skills. In Germany as well, the company that I looked at, this particular company, they were all divided according to the different language floors. So you had the Arabic and Persian floor, you had the Scandinavian, you had the German. So there's also this supply of the skills, which is why companies go to these specific places. At the same time, even though companies find these locations, outsourcing always is always posing some kind of risk. Any kind of company, when they outsource, it will pose risk for their operations, for their business models. In content moderation or any other work, the most important risk that we see is related to workers, so, as opposed to what people might think that workers are passive, they're not. They come with their own active agency, they come with their own interest. They come with their own motivations, why they want to do this work. So in India, most of the workers were doing it, and I'll come to this later on, but they were doing it because they wanted to build a career in digital marketing. Motivations, their interests, whatever, it's always a source of risk, because ultimately the choice of where they work, which company they work within a capitalist system lies with the worker. Now, of course, you always have these aspects of, like, for example, border policies, unemployment, immigration issues. There's all kinds of structural things that are affecting the choices of workers, but they still have some kind of choice where they park, where they work and who they work with, etc. So that always creates uncertainty. Will workers work? Will they leave immediately? So companies are always worried about that. Then, of course, when you outsource this work to another company, you don't have direct control, right? It's not within your own company headquarters. So there's all kinds of uncertainty to their business model. So this control happens at 3 levels. One at the macro level, one at the macro level. So as I mentioned before, companies go to specific locations such as India or Germany. They go because, they can, in terms of these locations, they can access land and resources. So in India, these big companies, they have access to software technology parks, special economic zones, which means that they don't have to pay taxes. They can access things in an easier way. They have access to the resources, to the land, etc., etc. All kinds of infrastructure provisions that the state supplies. Then there is also the second thing about the supply of educated and skilled workers, again at the macro level. So, in India, you have most of the content moderators, they have a bachelor's in either technology, so engineering background, or computer applications, etc. And even though content moderation work does not require any of those skills, it's a way to attract these platform companies. It's a way to say that, look, we have skilled labor. In Germany, as I mentioned, these workers have like these strong language skills, which is very important for moderating content. And the third aspect at the macro level in terms of how platform companies go to specific place, why they control their choices, is in terms of the relaxed labor laws, right? So again, in India, you have the Indian state, the government not interfering in the relations between companies and the workers. It's largely left to the companies themselves to manage it out, to figure it out, which has resulted in some kind of a self-regulation model. And of course, there's exploitation of workers, but it also comes with this whole professionalism thing that they will figure it out themselves. In Germany, you have strong labor laws, but at the same time, there's a large amount of research that shows that migrant workers often fall outside of the protection of these labor laws. And there are many different reasons for it. One reason is, of course, that workers are worried of making works councils, joining trade unions, because what it might do for their visa issues and all. But at the same time, there's also lack of distrust between the traditional German unions and the workers, that the trade workers say, migrant workers, that these unions are not understanding them, etc. What happens, whatever the reason is, what happens that a lot of these migrant workers fall out of the protection of labor laws in Germany. So these reasons at the macro level influence why platform companies go to these places and why they control, why they choose specific destinations. At a more meso level, we see that control happens between these platform companies and their subcontractors. They control everything. So when they find a subcontractor, which is a big company, they tell them, look, this is our content moderation policies, these are our standards, this is how work is supposed to be done. We would probably make a 6 months contract with you, and you need to give us the exact number of targets. You need to finish this amount of moderated content within this amount of time. So it's highly, highly controlled. They also send what is very important to this control at this company level is the software. So content moderation software is in most situations supplied by the platform companies. So this software directly sends the flagged content from the workers, from the users to the workers. I'll show you that illustration very quickly, but I just want to give you an overview of this. So this software also allows platform companies to monitor how workers are working. They can see how much they've done in how much amount of time. So, platform companies can no longer say, we don't know how work is taking place, because they do know, because of the highly automated content moderation software that is being used in these companies. What this does is that the subcontractors don't have much role to sort of like try to negotiate, try to do more, because these subcontractor management are then left to the role of managing the salaries, the human resources aspect, the leaves, etc. They're supposed to manage. At the same time, that is also not to be ignored, because this is also important. It ensures that workers continue to work. At a more micro level, we can see how workers actually work. And I think the next slide will show more of that. But they hire specific kind of workers. The platform companies are not directly hiring. They get the subcontractors to hire. So, as I mentioned, IT workers in India, they want to make a career. Then there's migrant workers. And most of these workers don't really resist. So there is also high attrition rate. They leave very soon. So there's many different control strategies that take place at the work level. So this is how a workplace sort of like representation looks like. This is again an instance. So you have content coming from the social media platform. Either it goes through automated filtering. Now most platforms do that. This through automated filtering, whether it's automatic flagging or user flagged content. Then it goes in between to this in the center to this workplace, the workplace micro level, right? So workers are divided according to different content queues. Like these queues are based on the moderation policies. So again, just for simplification processes, I've just put 4 queues here. It could be hate speech, violence, spam, e-commerce. There's all kinds of queues where workers are divided, and then workers are divided according to different teams. So each team has 15 to 20 people, and then it's also according to the experience levels of the workers. It could be entry-level workers, high level. Again, this is a simplified model. It depends from one company to the other. So Google, for example, has many levels of workers. For its YouTube content moderation, there is level 1, level 3, but Facebook doesn't have that. So there's different ways of really organizing work. And then once this content is moderated, like it's continuously being also checked for quality. So there's somebody, a quality analyst, trainer, social media, subject matter expert, which focuses on the moderation policy, who are checking, randomly taking 1 out of 100 cases. Again, depends on the company, how they want to do it. But 1 out of 100 to check if the content has been moderated properly. If it's not, then it goes back to the workers. All of this is very highly controlled. It takes place through a software, depending on the kind of content. If it's a long video, then workers have several minutes. If it's a short, video, smaller amount of time. If it's an image, then just a few seconds. If it's text, depends upon what kind of text it is, then. So it's very, very small amount of time that workers have to do. And the software, there's a paper that I wrote together with my colleague, where we actually studied the interface of the software. It's in the publication list in my last slide. So if you're interested on how the software looks like, we've explored that in that paper. Anyway, so then this moderated content goes to either another office somewhere else. Workers don't know where it goes. They really don't know. They don't have an idea about where this work is going. And it clearly shows how alienated they are from the content moderation process, but they don't know where it goes. It's also very secretively kept away from them. But it either goes to another office or it directly goes back to the social media platform. So this is how sort of like this content moderation architecture looks like in terms of connecting the user flagging activities and the work process. And it's important to study this in comprehension because most of the scholars of platform studies, particularly studying labor, they don't really look at the activities of the users, and it's important to do so. Although my research hasn't really looked at what happens when the content goes back, how does the user respond, and I think this is another link of the chain that that can be studied further by scholars. All right. I mean, as I mentioned, control at the workplace is very highly, work is highly controlled. Content moderation work. Workers are divided in, small teams. And I've mentioned here work is highly fragmented, and I think it's important to understand that because before work was outsourced, it wasn't fragmented. It wasn't like, one piece of user flagged content goes to the worker. It has been divided into smaller tasks so that it can be outsourced, so that it can be monitored, so that it can be controlled. This is why content moderation tasks are fragmented like this. This is how commercial content moderation industry operates, by fragmenting and standardizing the work. All right, so the workers are bound by targets, which I was also mentioning. They're required to use their knowledge, but in highly controlled manner. What this means is that, oftentimes, of course, you have the moderation policies and standards, and you can check the content according to that. But sometimes you might have a unique piece of content or a complicated piece of content where you don't know what is supposed to be done. So, for example, there might be a hacking video. Is hacking allowed? But I mean, Google says hacking is not allowed. We cannot promote hacking. But what if it's an informational video? Then the worker spends time in trying to figure out, why it should not be deleted, or why it should not be geo-blocked, why it should be allowed, right? So they then spend time trying to find a solution. But this is, of course, not always also, supported by the companies. Google supports it. So the workers working for YouTube told me that, but some other company might not support it because they have such high targets, right? So it really depends. Anyways, workers are required to put their knowledge, but in a very controlled manner. The amount of work workers do is not valued either socially or economically. By economically, I mean that they don't get good salaries, they get very little money, and they can't also develop their skills. It's also socially unvalued because it remains invisible. It mostly remains invisible to the work, the kind of work they're doing and how they're doing. So there is no social and economic valuation of it. Despite that high control, despite the standardization of work, there is still limits to automating work and management. And of course, we're still understanding what's happening with the AI technologies, what will happen in terms of its implications and regulation. But at the current moment, it can be said that there are still limits to automating content moderation, especially let's think about in terms of labor. Even though it's highly standardized and controlled, you still need workers because of the unique content, complicated content. In my research, I called it, I tried to link it with the dynamic character of social media platforms, that, there's constant sort of negotiation happening between the social media users and the platforms, because social media users come with their own meaning-making ideas and understanding. So they're always trying to influence things, which is why there will always be some kind of also uncertainties on the platforms, which is why you will still need the workers, right? And companies don't want to have content moderation errors. On the other hand, you have the management, of course, the subcontractor management. It's so highly controlled. Platform companies control all of that, but you still need, management to go on the floor, walking around, to, create, to have some kind of counseling mechanisms for the workers, to have some kind of relaxation activities, to do some motivation, or to control them, or to supervise them. So that management cannot also be automated. You have all these sort of algorithmic management, the use of technologies for managing. And of course, that assists the work of the management, but the human management cannot be replaced. So what does it mean then? We saw now that there is high degrees of control, but we also saw that workers and management, the subcontractor management in this whole outsourcing process is still needed. And so here it's important to also see this whole sort of like power relations taking place between the platform companies and the other actors involved. So on one hand, you have the sort of the power relations between the states, right? Whether it's Indian state or the German state and the platform companies, right? Like, as I mentioned before, the states attract these companies to come and either, provide export revenue, so like foreign direct investment, or create employment or whatever. There's a lot of different reasoning happening between the state and the platform companies, like in terms of the trade policies of the state. Then there is power relations we saw between the platform companies, these big social media companies, and the subcontractors. And then there is power relations between management and content moderators. It's important to see that, of course, these relations between all these different actors, they are characterized by high asymmetry. It's a very unequal relationship that we saw, right? Like these companies come, they extract the labor land, they control the companies, they control the workers, but there is also struggle happening, Now at the level of the state and the companies, it's happening through trade policy. So recently, the Indian government, the BJP government, it slashed out more than 90% of what is called as the bilateral investment treaty, which is a tool that was formulated in the 1990s in India to attract foreign investment and revenue, etc. But it was also a tool to sort of protect the interests of foreign companies, in terms of that they could have international arbitration to protect their interests. And what happened, there was a few cases where some big companies, Australian and British companies, they sued the Indian government, and they won, and the government had to pay a lot of fines. And so what is happening now is that the government is slashing out, canceling a lot of these BITs, these investment treaties, even though if it has meant that the foreign direct investment is going low, the inflows are going low. But of course, it's trying to also make new free trade agreements. Now, the first time India has made free trade agreements with 4 European countries. It's trying to make new trade relations, etc. What is also happening is that the country is also supporting the big companies in India, the large Indian corporations. That is happening through the Digital Competition Act, the draft Digital Competition Act, where it wants to control big tech companies, which have become monopolies, right? So it wants to control Facebook and Google. You might have heard Google was sued in India for its app services, etc. So it's trying to control all those companies. But the question is then, how is the state trying to protect the interests of workers and small and medium companies? It's not really doing that. There's no policies for supporting the small and medium enterprises in India. The policies that the state has come out for workers, it's extremely detrimental to workers. There's codification of labor laws. Unions have been opposing. The government does not engage with unions. So all of this is also what I'm trying to say. All of this power struggle between platform companies and foreign platform companies, foreign platform companies, and the state is also happening in a context of an authoritarian Indian state that is not really protecting the workers and the local companies. Okay, then there is the power relations between platform companies and the subcontractors, right? So, I mean, in my study, I saw how there was this big Indian subcontractor and it just quit from its project, content moderation project with Facebook. It just said, I'm not going to work anymore. This is not viable for me. This happened in 2020 during COVID-19 lockdown. So I studied this case, and this big company just left from this project because it did not see, this Indian company did not see it as being part of its business model. So it left, and Facebook found another company, and all the workers from the previous Indian company were then transferred to this new company. So you can also see how much, even though this Indian company subcontractor tried to negotiate for power, you can also see how these big platform companies are still able to replace another. Then you have management and workers. Workers are not, as I said, they have agency, and there's different levels of that agency becoming into power. So they have resilience. There's a lot of resilience workers have. They keep continuing to work. Even though there's psychologically distressing content, they keep doing that work. They don't have any skill development. I mean, if you moderate content, you're not building any skills. You don't even get to learn about the policies of the company. What is content moderation policies? When workers said, we're interested in digital marketing, but we don't really know how these policies are made. So some workers would go home and try to find more about the policy. So they take their own steps. And sometimes that agency, that power would also become sort of revoking, where, many workers broke their non-disclosure agreements that they signed at the onset of their work, spoke with me, spoke with the media. They want to tell the world that, look, this work is not really great, and how it can be made better. I remember there were a few workers, especially this one worker who came from a farming background, and he wanted to start his own content moderation company. He said, I think it's a very important thing, content moderation, but I think the way that these companies are doing is not right, and I want to start my own company. But the last I spoke with him, he could not find any investors. So there is also some kind of power struggle happening between companies and workers. All right, so that's it from me. Thank you so much, and I look forward to any kinds of questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Asana. Well, I think if I could sum up, I'm going to sum up in Portuguese now. O que eu acho mais interessante no trabalho da Sana é que ela aponta que mesmo essas companhias que têm acesso a toda essa tecnologia, que criam essa tecnologia, essas mesmas companhias não estão trabalhando somente de forma automatizada na moderação do conteúdo, elas precisam de trabalhadores manuais, digamos assim. Também achei muito interessante que, para terceirizar, é preciso fragmentar e estandardizar o trabalho, né? Sem isso, não se consegue terceirizar. E a gente está falando aqui de trabalhadores que são que têm uma qualificação específica e preciosa, mas que trabalham numa situação muito precária. Somehow they are skilled workers and in a very precarious situation. I found this was very interesting. And now I'm going to hand the word to Marcelo Alves. Marcelo Alves is professor at the University, at the Pontifical University, Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro, and he has been working social network analysis, social media network analysis for a while, and got a lot of prizes with his work in Brazil. So, Marcelo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Liriam, for your invitation to be here. We're glad to actually hear Sana after reading so much of her work. Thank you very much, Sana, for the brilliant presentation. It's very nice to actually see the slides and hear from you. We debated your chapter last week in my research group, and we had a lot of insights from the colleagues and students. And I'm very happy to be here and debate your work. I actually held event in Brazil debating disinformation, platform labor, platform regulation on a global South perspective last November. So it's very nice to actually have this conversation in a South-to-South manner. I was talking to Liriam yesterday that seems that moderation work is very, it's not unusual here in Brazil, because both Liriam and I have relatives or known people that either are currently working on content moderation or have considered working in the past in content moderation. I have a sister that actually almost worked for TikTok here in Brazil doing content moderation, and happily she did not proceed this work path. It's very good to hear you speaking and actually read your work because of the qualitative nature and how you actually get to reach out to the workers and interview. I think it's a great challenge to actually talk to these people because of the NDA agreements and all the secretive kind of nature of this work. So you bring a spotlight in this kind of work relations and power struggles, which is very important in this kind of precarious and asymmetrical work. Also, the Global South knowledge to actually speak with Indian workers. I would love to hear and see some work and papers in this kind of research here in Brazil. I think Rafa Groman is kind of interviewing, trying to explore these debates here in Brazil, and how you actually shed some light on the content moderation work conditions and how it is actually very well tightly management and the precarious relations in India. It's very interesting to hear, and also the geopolitical implications of your work. I think has a lot of connections here with Brazil. I think content moderation is such an interesting topic, and when we debate how AI fits into this mix, is not on the social technical possibilities and algorithm detection, but also how AI is very intertwined with the content moderation work when we debate red teamings and values alignment. So it also is a content moderation process that is very heavily dependent on workers. I come from this topic from a background in political communication, platform studies, and digital methods background. So I've written and presented some work in content moderation in the context of how platform governments create the rules and apply the rules, enforce the rules within democratic settings, and especially within the context of election in Brazil. So we had the insurrection on January 8th, and the people violently invading the Brazilian buildings, and how this was actually live streamed in the YouTube and digital platforms here in Brazil. So I'm working on how to detect and preserve or counter-archiving the videos before they are actually removed from the platforms. And we are also, because of the DSA in Europe, we actually got to see the breakdowns of, because we don't have these transparency rules in Brazil, the breakdowns of how many workers are employed in each country. And there are low employment of content moderation workers in Brazil. So I'd like to hear from you how to think of this kind of geopolitical and power relation asymmetries when we, on one hand, know that this is a very unequal and uneasy relation between the outsourcing of the work, but also, on the other hand, it is kind of necessary because we are always saying that we need more content moderators here in Brazil because we need them to actually know the country cultural aspect, social aspect, political history, in order to better moderate the content, especially when you think about freedom of speech and all the problems with the far right that we have in Brazil. So at the same time, we also debate the need to have more content moderators. And in some sense, there is this asymmetry when you outsource only the application, the task of applying the moderation, and not the creation of the rules. So I would love to hear more from you if you actually debate how this kind of intellectual job, the job of preparing the governments and the terms of service of the platform seldom are localized and context specific to the countries. Again, thank you very much for the presentation.
No, thanks so much. Such an interesting question in terms of power asymmetries, but also in terms of the local expertise that actually comes from these workers and valuing them. And you're completely correct, Marcelo, in terms of the need for content moderation. I mean, as I mentioned, probably Brazil is also a big consumer market of social media platforms, and the same in India as well. But at the same time, workers do not have power in terms of how the rules are set, in terms of how the policies are set, which again you mentioned as well, and they want to have power over it, right? Like the mere fact of their motivation in terms of becoming content moderators, becoming digital marketing experts. They want to know about how these platforms operate. This is their main interest. I mean, even though they have, background in technology and stuff, they're not interested in becoming engineers, but in fact, they find meaning in this world of social media in terms of moderating, but also doing more work in terms of user operations. So some of the workers, for example, who left YouTube, there was more experience to be made and more things to be learned working for YouTube than at any other company. So they went and started working for TikTok. TikTok had just come in at that time. And unlike other models of content moderation, TikTok required experts, the local experts, in terms of user operations, user retention, all those kinds of things that workers who had content moderation experience, they could go and do. So some workers did not really enjoy working for TikTok. Again, the management styles were not so great. It was also different kinds of videos, very short videos. But TikTok wanted local experts because the content was only for the way TikTok operates. So it was only for the Indian content. I think the way to imagine it, and this is again being informed by my interviews with the workers, the way to imagine a different kind of content moderation outsourcing work is to have workers having a more say, to not separate them from the way policies are designed, and I think that is a general sort of thing we can talk about all kinds of work in terms of how workers are being are alienated from the products, and they don't want to. They want to know more about this product. And perhaps this would also mean then that there is sort of like, that there is, I don't know, more, less disassociation between the users and the workers. Because if you think about it, the secrecy that is, that we see in content moderation, when workers apply for this work, they don't even know what content moderation is going to entail. Right from the job advertisements. I've studied a lot of job advertisements for content moderators, and you could only see a few lines saying, perhaps they would say Facebook process, non-voice process, which is like they're not engaging with they don't have to speak with the users and things like that. So then you have the non-disclosure agreements, then even the employment contract. So I did some participant observation where I applied as a worker and went inside the company. And I went through the recruitment process, and it would take like 5 to 6 hours. There were many rounds of interviews. I've seen the employment contract, how it looks like. Again, very limited information on what the work will entail. They do some kind of, companies do some kind of tolerance test in the beginning. They tell the workers, look, you might have to see psychologically distressing content. But nothing prepares them when they really see it. Some workers already leave, but I remember somebody who was working for Facebook's marketplace, and she was doing, you don't really see psychologically distressing content. And at some point, randomly, she sees a content where a person is being skinned alive on the platform. And what prepares you for that? When you work for these queues such as marketplace, you don't even get counseling services, right? So those kinds of things. So workers are not really prepared. So why keep this information away from them? Why not involve them in the process? What has a company to lose? And I think this is a question, something that media scholars and labor scholars can together answer. Would it really affect, if workers would have more power in the content moderation process? Would it really affect the user platform relations? So I think this is something that we need to think together, yeah.
Yeah, great. And if I might add a second question regarding this topic, because there is a lot of research being done on psychological distress and the actual trauma that these workers experience. But reading from your work, I was fascinated to, and I think it's fascinating that you've actually done participative research, which is amazing to hear. And there is kind of a double-edged sword here, because you actually say that there is some kind of aspiration of working to these kind of big tech companies. Like I work for TikTok, I work for Meta. So there is this kind of very skilled workers that actually, some of them have bachelors, even though it is not necessary for the working environment hiring. But they actually are from IT backgrounds. So there's this aspiration of working and trying to move up the ladder in the company. And at the same time, they have to deal with this kind of trauma and kind of psychological distress of very bad working conditions and being exposed to this kind of hateful and very kind of various kind of bad content. So how do they deal with this, like this aspiration and this trauma?
Different ways, actually. There's a lot of resilience that we see, when workers join. That resilience also comes from, of course, a lot of training. Companies train these workers. They tell them, look, you are protecting the internet, you're safeguarding the internet, and workers internalize that to a certain extent. But you also see the limits to that internalization as well. A lot of workers don't tell their families that they're doing content moderation work. It's a low, social status. In India, there's these workers who come from middle class backgrounds, upper caste backgrounds. There's a lot of social status involved, especially you have a bachelor's in technology. Why would you want to do this BPO kind of work, But they still do it because they attach meaning with it. They want to find their own career. They want to find their own path. There is some kind of autonomy associated with it. Despite what the society might say, they hide from it and stuff like that. So they also put a lot of resilience. No, let's try to stick in. Let's try to stay. Let's try to work. They find individual forms of comfort. The woman's example that I told you about, she had a nice colleague. She said, what I did was I took a break, I went out, I told my supervisor, depends on what your relationship is with your supervisor, your team leader. You can go outside, take breaks, So she went out, she went for a chai break or something. But then she also told me, and I often heard this from workers, it's just a job. It's just a job, this is what I meant by this culture of professionalism in the IT industry. The IT industry in India doesn't have any unions until now. There are now some professional associations, that try to train workers, skill them, but there's no like resistance or bargaining or striking happening. This sector has really stayed on this sense of, you have to be a professional, you don't complain, you don't resist. And so there is a strong sense of it's just a job. But at the same time, there's also limits to it. This culture of professionalism also goes on to workers trying to find skill development opportunities. They try to learn about things. I remember some people, even though they worked for such long hours, they would go back home, go onto this website, Coursera, try to learn different things, whether it's related to, platforms, whether it's related to something else. Some companies offer some kind of skill development through courses. You can do some course, but those courses are like Microsoft Excel or things like that. That is actually useful for the company, not for the workers. Workers don't really want to learn Microsoft Excel. I mean, it is practical, but how much can you do with that, right? There is like this self-skilling initiatives workers put. They try to learn. And when nothing really works, where there is no valuation, where you can't, access any good jobs, you can't get promoted. The maximum a content moderator can go up to is a team leader. So you have different levels of content moderator, level 1, 2, 3. And then you have maybe the subject matter expert who knows about policies, and then the team leader. But above the team leader, of course, there's operations manager, but nobody has really reached up to that level, right? So maximum workers stay is really like 3 years, 4 years, but they don't really see their future in these companies. So they leave from those companies. They don't really see any kind of valuation happening. And it's interesting that most content moderators are then stuck in similar kind of jobs. They're doing one kind of customer service work to another kind of low paid work. Because they have experience, they might get some kind of higher salary because they have experience, but that's really it. So even though you see that they're interested in this work, they're unable to really exercise their interest because of the high control in this work.
Thank you very much, Sana. Did you get to your answers, Marcelo?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sana, for your presentation, for this opportunity to have a conversation, and I'm looking forward to read your papers.
Sana, you said you have to leave. When you have to leave?
I can stay for another 5 minutes or so if there's any pressing question.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to ask it. Do you have any questions? Alguém gostaria de fazer uma pergunta? Você pode vir no microfone, por favor? Para que o pessoal do YouTube possa ouvir também.
Hi, Professor Sana Ahmad. How do you have any studies about the mental health from those moderators? I know there are contents that are really violent or hate, or there are violence, there are things that are really, sometimes things that are not really safe for people to watch or to tell, or even to see, to watch. And how do you cope with those? How do the unions, if there are any unions, how do the workers are being protected, if there are any protections to those workers?
I think there are some studies on the mental health of content moderators. In my work, I try to talk about the mental health of workers mostly through not just the violent content that they see, but also that they're not able to build a career, that they're not valued by the companies. This also has a lot of effect on them. I think this was one of the biggest reasons why workers left, that they felt like there was no moving up. They were being exploited, and that really affected them a lot. Of course, this depends on place to place. Like this was the case in India. In Germany, more workers were vocal. They talked more about the things that they had to watch, the micromanagement they felt from the companies. They didn't want to be micromanaged. In India, what I saw, there was counseling available for workers in content cues such as violent and there was sexually explicit content. So this is where counseling was available. But even in these cues, not all workers took counseling, because when you take counseling, firstly, there is the issue of trust. These counselors are put in the company by the management. So the workers are scared. How much should they say? Can they complain? What if they complain about their work? Is management going to turn against them? Even though the counseling is there for them, but this whole professionalism thing that don't complain about your work. It's just a job. They're constantly trained. It's just a job. Relax. It's just the garbage of the world. We're cleaning, we're protecting the world. They're really trained to think like that you shouldn't take it personally, right? So there is this aspect that should they really complain? Should they really talk about it? Again, they have to, they have so many targets, so much work they have to complain. It would affect their time as well. Then, of course, there's this whole sort of cultural aspect of mental health, that mental health is not really seen as being important in India still for a lot of people. It's not a mainstream concern. People would say rather, why do I have to speak to a counselor? It's a Western thing, So there's many different reasons attached with counseling. It's not so easy. But this counseling is also only available for one or two queues where there's really a lot of content. Other queues that I talked about, e-commerce, the Facebook marketplace, even though there's not a lot of content coming, once in a while it would come, they would not get any individual counseling. There would be group counseling, where you could go as a group once a month, talk. Then there's also recreation activities in companies. Sometimes, they try to do all this yoga and dance and all those things. Not all workers took part in it. This is also part of this whole business logic of corporate culture. It's a very big thing in the IT industry, bean bags and yoga and music, to keep workers motivated. But sometimes workers would do it, but they were also like, I just want to finish my targets and go home, and again, because they want to build their career, they try to be as professional and as good at their work as possible. So, but eventually there's burnout and people also leave or they're dissatisfied. There's no unions in India. There are unions in Germany. There is one union, for example, but the union at this company had no power in Germany. Yeah, Facebook stopped one project with this company in Berlin. 2 people lost their jobs, at least from the sample I studied. But one of them was a member of the trade union Verdi. That person got 1,000 euros worth compensation, and that's it. So you can also see how much power the union really has.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for your answer. Thank you very much for your brilliant presentation, for this discussion. Thank you very much, Marcelo, for participating with your expertise. So we'd like to say thank you very much also to our IT that enables this conversation. And we are going to see each other here on 18th April again. So thank you, Sana. All the best for you. Bye.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye, Marcelo. Ok, gente, terminou um pouco mais cedo porque ela está com problema de saúde. Ela está grávida e está com um probleminha de saúde. Todo mundo assinou aqui? Tá. E aí é o seguinte, ó, na semana que vem... Tá todo mundo no grupo do WhatsApp? Quem que tá? Eu acho que eu coordenei
de análise do conteúdo eu estou, nesse dessa disciplina não estou, porque até por isso eu mandei uma pergunta sobre essa disciplina no outro grupo.
Então, acho que você pode deixar seu telefone para a gente incluir você nesse grupo. Então, vamos colocar o nome do telefone, porque assim, eu tive que adaptar o cronograma da disciplina, claro, à disponibilidade deles. Então, a gente começou já com uma palestra e não teve nem tempo de conversar sobre como vai ser a disciplina e tal, né? Isso a gente vai fazer semana que vem, tá bom? Então, por favor, todo mundo que estiver no grupo, porque eu vou anunciar no grupo daí, onde é que a gente vai se encontrar, provavelmente na sala 2, só vou confirmar, e para a gente conversar sobre o que tem que fazer com essa disciplina, como que funciona, tem que ter 25% de presença aqui, né? Essa é a vantagem de vocês são os únicos que podem fazer perguntas, não podem fazer perguntas, não tem pergunta online, tá legal? Então a gente se vê semana que vem, às 10, provavelmente na sala 2. Eu aviso mais uma vez pelo grupo do WhatsApp, tá? Obrigada por terem vindo.
Então, o telefone aqui, então. Nesse tudo,